In this video, I'll be philosophizing on personal responsibility concerning the personality characteristics, picking up where I had been philosophizing in the previous video I had posted on personal responsibility, as it's meaningful to communicate clearly the remainder of the overarching subcomponents concerning, more uniquely, self-committedness. I had discussed clearly planning and or initiative, yet I had only begun to communicate on what was the transition into about to discuss self-committedness that concerns holding to one's promises and or engaging more meaningful, future-oriented endeavors that one had prior existing, clearly communicated one would be there and or conduct X diligently, meaning that there are certain meaningful concerns within self-committedness that often influence an individual's feelings of guiltiness on the opposite polarity of self-committedness is unreliability. And often unreliableness that relates to feelings of guilt and or apathy, meaning that there are usually sex and or gender differences in terms of individuals whom tend to experience apathy, more likely to be within boys and or men who are engaging in often misconducts that result in negligence that we should expect, as personal responsibility is within duty of care and the opposite polarity of duty of care is negligence. So in terms of lacking planning and or lacking initiative, these all result in some negligence in the extremes and contribute to negligence within what we could aggregate to the total sum evaluations of deprivations in terms of personal responsibility, that individuals tend to be engaging in misconducts that ultimately result in irresponsible resultants, and or may not necessarily conduct and therefore engage in the misconduct of conducting nothing. That is a misconduct, as one has the choice to conduct or not to conduct one's meaningful affairs that are within one's need to engage certain meaningful underlying psychological need satisfactions derived from what are essential underlying psychological needs, be it that an individual may be able, and therefore be it that an individual is able to satisfy certain essential underlying psychological needs, yet has opted to avoid satisfying certain essential underlying psychological needs by choice, is responsible for the negligent treatment, even if an individual desires not to conduct and or feels one to be too bad to bother to meaningfully engage X. Therefore, an individual is still responsible, yet is experiencing more difficulties in terms of the irresponsibility. One may experience apathy, uncommitted to oneself, failing oneself, resulting in often certain pangs of being that are not necessarily always within one's self origins, meaning there may be certain cases where the deprivations are bodily within one's subjectivity that one is resentful of, and or may engage in blaming others for not satisfying one's needs, be it that one thinks it would be better for one's needs to be satisfied as the pangs arise within one's subjectivity, yet contribute nothing meaningful to truly deserve the underlying psychological need satisfactions. And this connects to work ethic, as individuals who tend to be the most irresponsible and or highest in irresponsibility, and or whom are most negligent, also tend to be low in work ethic and or undeservingness, and or whom tend to hold more cynical perspectives that attempt to provide irrational, meaningful utterances of thought in terms of thinking that truly things are a dog-eat-dog worlds, and or that had one not cheated and or lied and or manipulated to recognize certain underlying psychological need satisfactions that are often uniquely constrained to the essential psychological needs, and or fixate on extrinsic motivations for monetary rewards in order to satisfy certain contorted and or disordered maladaptive perceptions of certain essential psychological needs. And you see this within substance abuse, be it that substance one abuses, be it alcohol, that is the most abused substance, is a drink, and or a drink that is maladaptive in terms of dehydrating individuals. So it does not appropriately satisfy thirst, yet one may experience thirst and or tends to need water and or may abstain from the necessary water, and this tends to be the resultant of blackout experiences and or the worst hangovers an individual may experience in terms of certain withdrawals that are fatal and or in some cases more likely to result in serious injury and or often the dysphoric, harmful disassociations resulting in delusions, as individuals who suffer from certain substance abuse related disorders that abuse alcohol may more likely experience hallucinations resulting from alcohol addiction, and or in some cases seizures, and or need to be hospitalized for the serious negative consequences in terms of an individual whom is failing to satisfy their own underlying psychological needs, often apathetically, as alcohol consumption itself increases the likelihood an individual will disregard the consequences of their misconducts and or engage more negligent misconducts. And this is why in courts you may see some individuals whom are more likely to commit offenses drunk and or intoxicated on certain substances, yet may have overconsumed, intent to overconsume alcohol, yet the alcohol itself in most cases is not sufficient to satisfy what's appropriate to mitigate the risks, as individuals often are engaging in irresponsible and or negligent and or apathetic intrinsic motivations to even ingest and or consume alcohol, and or whom may in some cases intentionally consume alcohol to feint the associated causations resulting in apathy and or disregard for the consequences to attempt to mitigate the future-oriented consequences of engaging in certain crime, and or the consequences one may experience in terms of the guilt to diminish the guilt, allowancing one to easier commit misconducts negligently. And it's the negligence that an individual is most responsible for. Be it an individual was an axe murderer whom was abusing psilocybin mushrooms, be it highly improbable and or most likely the resultant of other underlying hallucinogenic causations resultant from a distinct direction of harmful, negative, detrimental effects to mind-body connections, be it that psilocybin mushroom consumption is more likely to elicit the learning and or memory hormone, well-established and or named brain-derived neurotropic factor. Individuals whom engage in self-induced consumption for more philosophical and or deliberate exploration into the unknown unknowns, willful in their explorations of altering consciousness concerning the influence of a consumable one consumes that is a solid that is transforming the mind through what is physical, and or this physical interaction within mind-body connections results in a transformation in what's experientially encountering what is a more reliable, consistent transformation in consciousness, cultivating what is a curiosity to some individuals who may be interested in exploring their own subjectivity, as be it subjectivity is often what most intellectuals proportion to engage rational thinking. Yet intellectuals often may be more likely to experiment with psilocybin mushrooms from the paradoxical experiential encounters with the physical substance one ingests, meaningfully similar to food, that influences one's experiential encounters with one's being, be it that certain foods have a direct and or indirect influence on certain flavorings and or tastes and or therefore subjective experiences, yet do not robustly transform one's consciousness, meaningfully similar to smoking cannabis, that one may experientially encounter reliable transformations within one's subjective experiences from what is a psychophysiological transformation, inhaling the smoke from burning cannabis, that certain cannabinoids bind to synapses within neurons, influencing transformations within one's consciousness, with distinct transformations in how one may feel and or often feelings of euphoria, optimizing creative, distinct, seemingly random, yet one may connect coherently and or cogently with soundness, often subsequently in terms of the decay in psychological entropy to communicate clearly, whom are more responsible compared to individuals whom are irresponsible and are more likely to experience psychosis and or whom are more likely to abuse certain substances. It's more rare you encounter an individual whom is coherent and or who may communicate